Seriously, that just happened. Welcome back to the shop. It's been really nice out, considering it's been, end of September here in the north. So I'm still in shorts today, but we're back in the shop working on the GTO again. I got a short list of things that I need to get done. And one of them is the rear end. The stock rear end in these things was a 10 bolt 8.2, and while it had bolt-in axles instead of C-clip axles, which is always a great idea, it's really, really weak. So I would have blown the thing up in no time with this motor. So I didn't want to put a 9-inch Ford in there because it just wouldn't look right. So I put a 12 bolt Chevy rear end in there, and then beefed it up with 33 spline axles and a Detroit locker and or spool, depending on which was broke at the time. And put a Girdle cap on the back. Now, when you launch, it's trying to throw the ring gear and the case, the posi unit, the Detroit locker, the spool, whatever it is, it's trying to throw all of that out the back. And it's trying to twist it out at the same time. So as a result, the bearing cap on the driver's side gets a little bit more abuse than the bearing cap on the passenger side. And what happened was the stud that goes up against the bearing cap as part of the girdle fatigued and broke. So I ordered up a new one from Bears, which deals in strain, even though it's an ultimate cap. But anyway, I got a new stud, so we need to pull the cap off, which is going to drain all the oil out of there. Put the new stud in, put the cap back on, seal it all back up, put fresh oil back in there. And while the cap is off, we're going to poke around in there and do a quick inspection to make sure that everything else is on the up and up. The way I abuse things, I'm not so optimistic. The inspection is going to go well, but we're going to try anyway. So I'm going to change out of my street clothes into my shop clothes, and we're going to get after it. All right, here's what we're talking about. So we've got two studs here that look like this, that push up against the caps, the bearing caps that hold the case, the traction lock, the posi unit, the Detroit locker, spool, whatever we've got in there at the time. And you can see that this stud here is sheared off where the jam nut goes. So we're going to be replacing this stud. To do that, we need to pull the cap off. To do that, we're going to drain out the oil first. So fortunately, these caps have drain plugs. So we'll get a drain pan underneath here. We'll pull that plug out, and we'll get after that. So it's the next day now, and I'm forcing myself to be out in the shop here because I want to try and get this thing back on. And I usually like to give the sealant an overnight to dry before I put oil back in there. And I'm kind of running out of time to get the car ready for the race this weekend. But yeah, I realize that the stuff I do in the shop here is in between my health nightmares, and they don't usually cooperate with the other timelines that I set for racing. But anyway, with the rear cap off, you can see now we've got these two studs that keep the rear caps from ideally moving backwards when we drop the clutch and it tries to push the differential case out the back of the housing. So these things butt up against the bearing caps and give it an extra bit of stiffness and strength. And you probably can't see it from your perspective, but this thing's got some battle scars on it. So again, the driver's side is the one that gets the bulk of the abuse, and that's the stud that snapped off here. So we're going to replace this stud, put the new one in here. We're going to clean this thing all up. We're going to clean the gasket surface, and then we'll go back into the housing, and we'll take a quick look at the ring and pinion and make sure the bearing caps, the bolts are still torqued, that they haven't loosened up. I'm not going to do a full inspection. I'm not going to pull the differential out, because then I got to pull the axles out, and then it becomes a whole big operation. And I just don't have the time or the energy to do that right now. So we're just going to assume that all the rest of it is all good, and hope for the best. But let's get this thing cleaned up, and let's get that stud changed out. So this is probably a good time for time lapse, some random music. I don't know what I'm going to play yet, but hopefully something that doesn't offend you. So away we go. Now the drain plug, which may or may not be in focus here, but has a magnet on the end of it. I've cleaned it up already. There were some metal shavings on the end of it, but I've kind of gotten used to the fact that there's always going to be metal shavings on this thing, and there wasn't any big chunks of metal on there, so the fine shavings don't offend me so much, whereas if I did find big chunks on there, then that would be a potential problem. But didn't have that, so again, we're going to assume that everything is good and happy in the rest of the rear end with the gears and with the Detroit lockers. So we'll put the plug back in, but we're going to use proper pipe thread sealant on it before we stick it back in there. Our cap is ready to go. So we're going to go back under the car, and we're going to clean up the mounting flange there. Again, check the torques, check the ring and pinion, make sure everything looks good there. And once it does, then we can put a bead of sealant around this thing, bolt it on, torque all the bolts down, torque our studs down and our lock nuts, and let it sit overnight before we put the oil back in there. All right, we're just going to try and goop some of the oil out of the bottom of this thing, and then we can get rid of the Yeah, I love gear oil. I love when my shop smells like gear oil. But if I can get most of the stuff out of the bottom, it'll stop dripping out, and then I don't need the drip tray here anymore. You might have noticed, if you're familiar with 12-volt rear ends, those aren't the factory bearing caps. Those are Mark Williams billet chromoly bearing caps. So again, and the bolts, high strength bolts to try and get a bit more strength and stiffness into this thing. All right, we're going to hope that that's going to be enough. So we'll get the drain pan out of here very slowly, ideally without dumping it over, because I've lived that nightmare already too. All right, so we're going to just take a quick look at our wear pattern on our ring gear. That is about as perfect as you can get on the drive side, which to me is more important, because that's the side that you hit under power. On the coast side, we also have a lovely pattern. Okay, so we're happy with that. We will check the torque on these things, make sure they haven't loosened off, and then we'll clean up the mating surface, goop it up, put it together, and let it sit overnight before we put oil back in it. Okay, so 65 foot-pounds is where we should be on these things, so that's good. That's good. So the driver's side hasn't loosened up at all, and that's the side that I'm most worried about. Okay, so they're all still at the torque spec, so I'm happy with that. Happy with the ring and pinion pattern. So again, we'll just clean it up, put some goop on there, bolt the cap back on, torque everything that needs to be torqued, and let it sit overnight before we fill it up again with gear oil. Foot-pounds is our torque setting for our cover bolts, like that. Like that. Those are torqued. Now the studs here get torqued to 10 foot-pounds, which is less than my half-inch torque wrench will do. So we'll get the get my little 3/8 bendy beam torque wrench. So snug that up. And that won't fit. Because I got a fuel pump in the way. So, yeah. We're going to have to guess at this one. Oh! Are you kidding me? The other stud just broke off. Yeah. More fail. All right, well, we'll torque the one good stud, and we'll order up another 5 or 10 studs, because apparently these things are consumables in my life. Anyway, 10 foot-pounds is 120 inch-pounds, which puts us out to right there. And at that point, we'll tighten up our jam nut. So it's a couple days later. The good news is Bear's Performance in Canada had more of these studs in stock, so I ordered 2 because I'm probably going to break another one. And the fact that they had these things in stock means that I'm probably not the only one that breaks these things on a regular basis, that they stock these things. So that's the good news. The bad news is I missed the last racing weekend of the year. So anyway, the more bad news is I get to do everything that you just saw me do over again. So I'm going to go do that. Then we're going to put the oil in and call this done. It's several days later again, but we got everything put back together with the rear end girdle cap, and the only thing to do now is just put oil in it, and we can wrap up this adventure. So I'm a big fan of the shockproof, heavy shockproof redline oil for the rear end. But to try and get it out of the bottle and into the rear end is a challenge. So there is another manufacturer that came up with the brilliant idea of putting gear oil in these bags, which makes it super easy to get the gear oil into tight locations. So I basically bought a bag of this stuff, dumped it out, and then refilled the bag with the good oil. So I'm going to stick a couple of bags of this in the rear end, and then that's done. If you've been eagle-eyed watching this video, you might have noticed the transmission's also out of the car right now. That's also another fail adventure. So look for an upcoming video on that shortly, as soon as I'm done failing with that one. But we're going to wrap this one up here now. So if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up, give it a like. If you like what I'm doing here, subscribe. If you've got comments, I'd love to hear it. And again, if you like this stuff, share it with your friends. So thanks again for watching. We'll see you on the next adventure.